What if I told you that 99% of people are living their entire lives without ever truly knowing themselves? What if the greatest minds in psychology discovered that most humans are trapped in a prison of their own unconscious making, never realizing the incredible power that lies dormant within them? Carl Jung said something that will shake you to your core: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But here's what he didn't tell the general public, and what you're about to discover will change how you see yourself forever. According to Carl Jung, there's a type of person so rare, so psychologically advanced, that they operate on a completely different level of consciousness. These individuals make up less than 1% of the population, yet they're responsible for virtually every breakthrough, every innovation, and every profound insight that has moved humanity forward. But before I reveal what separates these extraordinary minds from everyone else, let me ask you something that might disturb you. Are you living your life, or is your life living you? Carl Jung discovered through decades of research that the vast majority of people are what he called unconscious. They sleepwalk through life, driven by forces they don't understand, making decisions based on impulses they've never examined, and following patterns they inherited from their ancestors without question. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Think about that for a moment. How many times have you said, "That's just how I am," or "I can't help it"? Jung would tell you that's the voice of someone who has surrendered their power to unconscious forces. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this might be hard to hear. Jung discovered that most people spend their entire lives running from themselves. They project their fears, their insecurities, their unlived potential onto others. They see in the world exactly what they refuse to see in themselves. According to Carl Jung, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But 99% of people use this irritation to blame, to judge, to separate themselves from others, never realizing they're looking into a mirror. Carl Jung said there's a part of every human being that they desperately try to hide, not just from others, but from themselves. He called this the shadow. It's everything you've deemed unacceptable about yourself, everything you've pushed down into the darkness of your unconscious mind. Here's what Jung discovered that will blow your mind: the shadow isn't just your enemy, it's your greatest source of untapped power. But 99% of people are so terrified of their own darkness that they spend their entire lives running from it, never realizing that what they're running from is exactly what could set them free. Jung discovered that the people who achieve greatness, who create breakthrough innovations, who seem to possess an almost supernatural understanding of human nature, all have one thing in common: they've learned to integrate their shadow. They've made friends with their darkness. But wait, there's more to this that Jung kept hidden from his public lectures. According to Carl Jung, beneath your personal unconscious lies something even more powerful: the collective unconscious. It's a shared psychic space that connects all human beings, containing what he called archetypes, universal patterns of behavior and thought that have existed since the dawn of humanity. Jung said, the collective unconscious is made up of archetypes, which are universal patterns or images that derive from the collective unconscious. But here's the kicker: only 1% of people learn to consciously access this network. The rest remain trapped in their personal little worlds, never realizing they have access to the accumulated wisdom of our entire species. Carl Jung discovered that there's a psychological process so transformative, so powerful, that it literally creates a new type of human being. He called it individuation. It's the journey of becoming who you truly are, not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society expects you to be, but who you are at your deepest core. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. But here's what 99% of people don't understand: this isn't a destination, it's an ongoing process that requires incredible courage, brutal honesty, and a willingness to confront everything you've been taught to fear about yourself. According to Carl Jung, every person wears a mask. He called it the persona, the face you show to the world, the role you play in society. For 99% of people, this mask becomes so habitual, so automatic, that they forget it's just a mask. They begin to believe that the role they're playing is who they actually are. Jung discovered that the persona, while necessary for social functioning, becomes a prison when you identify with it completely. The 1% who transcend ordinary consciousness have learned to wear their masks consciously, knowing when to put them on and when to take them off. Carl Jung said something that will fundamentally change how you see every relationship in your life. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But here's the psychological mechanism most people never grasp. When you have a strong emotional reaction to someone, you're not really seeing them, you're seeing a part of yourself that you've disowned. Jung discovered that projection is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. The qualities you most admire in others, they exist within you. The qualities you most despise in others, they also exist within you. But 99% of people use projection to avoid self-knowledge, not to gain it. According to Carl Jung, every man has a feminine side, the anima, and every woman has a masculine side, the animus. These aren't just abstract concepts, they're living psychological realities that influence every decision you make, every relationship you enter, and every creative act you perform. Jung discovered that the people who achieve the highest levels of psychological development learn to integrate these opposite aspects of themselves. But 99% of people remain unconscious of these inner dynamics, leading to failed relationships, creative blocks, and a constant sense that something is missing from their lives. Carl Jung said there's a psychological function so powerful that it can literally create new possibilities where none existed before. He called it the transcendent function, the ability to hold two opposing ideas in your mind simultaneously without being torn apart by the tension. Jung discovered that this capacity is what separates genius from ordinary thinking. While 99% of people are driven to resolve contradictions quickly, to choose sides, to eliminate ambiguity, the 1% have learned to inhabit the space between opposites. This is where all breakthrough insights emerge. According to Carl Jung, there's an archetype that appears in the psyche of those destined for greatness, the wounded healer. These are individuals who have been broken by life in some fundamental way, but instead of becoming bitter or defeated, they transform their wounds into wisdom that can heal others. Jung said, the wounded healer is one of the most important archetypes in human psychology. But here's what 99% of people don't understand. Your deepest wounds aren't obstacles to your success, they're the source of your unique gift to the world. Carl Jung discovered something that science still struggles to explain, meaningful coincidences that seem to connect our inner psychological state with external events. He called these synchronicities, and he found that they occur most frequently in the lives of people who are psychologically awake. Jung said, synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. But 99% of people dismiss these occurrences as mere chance, never realizing that synchronicity is actually their unconscious mind communicating with them through the language of symbols and meaningful coincidences. According to Carl Jung, one of his most revolutionary discoveries was the existence of two fundamental personality types, introverts and extroverts. But here's what most people get wrong about Jung's theory. He wasn't just describing social preferences, he was describing two completely different ways of processing reality. Jung discovered that introverts draw their energy from their inner world of thoughts and reflections, while extroverts draw their energy from the outer world of people and activities. But in a culture that favors extroversion, countless introverts have been convinced there's something wrong with them, never realizing that some of history's greatest contributions came from introverted minds. Carl Jung said that the psyche operates according to a principle of compensation. When one aspect of your personality becomes too dominant, the unconscious automatically produces content to balance it out. This means that if you're too rational, your unconscious will produce irrational content. If you're too good, your unconscious will produce shadow material. Jung discovered that the people who achieve psychological wholeness learn to dance with this compensatory process rather than fight against it. But 99% of people experience this compensation as internal conflict, never realizing it's actually their psyche's attempt to help them become more complete. According to Carl Jung, there's a technique so powerful that it can literally allow you to have conscious conversations with your unconscious mind. He called it active imagination, and it involves entering a state between waking and sleeping where you can interact with the figures and images that emerge from your depths. Jung said, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." Through active imagination, the 1% learn to access this creative play instinct directly, while 99% remain cut off from their own creative source. Carl Jung made a statement that shocked the religious and scientific communities of his time. The approach to the numinous is the real therapy, and inasmuch as you attain to the numinous experiences, you are released from the curse of pathology. Jung discovered that every psychological problem, at its deepest level, is actually a spiritual problem, a disconnection from meaning, from purpose, from the sacred dimension of existence. But while 99% of people seek meaning in external authorities, the 1% learn to discover the sacred within themselves. According to Carl Jung, what we call the midlife crisis isn't actually a crisis at all, it's a natural psychological process that signals the beginning of the second half of life. Jung discovered that the first half of life is about establishing yourself in the world, but the second half is about discovering who you truly are beneath all your achievements and roles. Jung said, "The first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego, the second half is going inward and letting go of it." But 99% of people try to solve their midlife transitions by doing more of what worked in the first half of life, never realizing they need a completely different approach. Carl Jung discovered that the number 4 appears repeatedly in human psychology as a symbol of wholeness and completion. He found that mandalas, which are circular designs often divided into 4 parts, spontaneously appear in the dreams and artwork of people who are undergoing psychological transformation. Jung said, "The quaternity is an archetype of almost universal occurrence." He realized that the psyche naturally organizes itself into patterns of 4, and that understanding these patterns could provide a roadmap for psychological development that 99% of people never discover. According to Carl Jung, the medieval alchemists weren't really trying to turn lead into gold, they were using chemical symbolism to describe psychological transformation. Jung discovered that the alchemical process of solving, dissolving, coagulating, solidifying, and purifying provides a perfect metaphor for how the human psyche transforms itself. Jung said, "Alchemy is really the projection of a drama of the soul played out in the laboratory." The 1% who understand this process can consciously participate in their own psychological transformation, while 99% remain unconscious of the alchemical processes happening within them. Carl Jung warned that just as individuals have a personal shadow, entire cultures and nations have a collective shadow, all the qualities that the group has deemed unacceptable and projected onto others. Jung predicted that humanity's greatest challenges would come from our inability to recognize and integrate our collective shadow. Jung said, "The world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man." He saw that the external conflicts between nations and groups are really projections of internal psychological conflicts that we refuse to face. But while 99% of people get caught up in these external dramas, the 1% work on integrating their own shadows, knowing that this is the only way to truly change the world. According to Carl Jung, modern Western culture has made a tragic error by overvaluing thinking and undervaluing feeling. Jung discovered that feeling isn't just emotion, it's actually a rational function that evaluates meaning and significance. Without access to the feeling function, people become trapped in analysis paralysis, unable to make meaningful decisions. Jung said, "Thinking and feeling are both rational functions, inasmuch as they are both discriminating." The 1% have learned to honor both their thinking and feeling functions, while 99% of people, especially in intellectual circles, have cut themselves off from half of their decision-making capacity. Carl Jung discovered that the human psyche follows cyclical patterns, constantly returning to the same themes and challenges at deeper and deeper levels. What appears to be regression is often actually a spiral movement that brings us back to familiar territory with new understanding. Jung said, "The spiral is a symbol of death and rebirth." He realized that psychological development isn't linear, it's cyclical. The 1% understand that when old patterns resurface, it's not a sign of failure but an opportunity to integrate these patterns at a higher level of consciousness. According to Carl Jung, buried within every human psyche is an archetype he called the divine child, a symbol of our potential for renewal, creativity, and rebirth. This inner child isn't the wounded child that needs healing, it's the eternal aspect of ourselves that remains forever young, curious, and capable of wonder. Jung discovered that people who maintain contact with their divine child archetype remain creative and vital throughout their lives, while those who lose this connection become rigid, cynical, and spiritually dead. But 99% of people, in their rush to become adults, abandon this source of eternal renewal. Carl Jung identified two opposing archetypes that create enormous tension in human psychology: the senex, the wise old men, and the pure, the eternal youth. The senex represents structure, discipline, and responsibility, while the pure represents freedom, creativity, and possibility. Jung discovered that most people become identified with one or the other, leading to either premature aging or permanent adolescence. But the 1% learn to hold both archetypes in dynamic tension, accessing the wisdom of age without losing the vitality of youth. According to Carl Jung, his most important work wasn't any of his published books. It was a private journal he called the Red Book, where he recorded his encounters with his own unconscious mind. For decades, this book remained hidden, containing Jung's most radical insights about the nature of consciousness. Jung said, "The years when I was pursuing my inner images were the most important in my life, in them everything essential was decided." In the Red Book, Jung revealed that he had learned to have direct conversations with archetypal figures, accessing wisdom that seemed to come from beyond his personal knowledge. Carl Jung underwent what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period of psychological crisis that lasted several years and nearly drove him to madness. But instead of running from this experience, Jung dove deeper into it, emerging with insights that would revolutionize psychology. Jung discovered that what we call mental illness is often actually a spiritual emergency. The psyche's attempt to break through to a new level of consciousness. The 1% learn to navigate these psychological upheavals as opportunities for transformation, while 99% pathologize and medicate these natural processes. According to Carl Jung, the goal of all psychological development is the realization of what he called the self, not the ego self that you think you are, but the deeper self that encompasses your entire being, both conscious and unconscious. Jung said, "The self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality." He discovered that the self isn't something you achieve but something you discover, it's what you've always been beneath all your identifications and roles. Carl Jung predicted that modern humanity would face a crisis unlike any in history, the loss of connection to meaning and purpose in an increasingly technological world. He saw that while we would gain unprecedented power over the external world, we would lose contact with our inner world, leading to what he called the general neurosis of our age. Jung said, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved but only outgrown." He realized that the problems facing modern humanity couldn't be solved through more technology or better systems, they could only be transcended through individual psychological development. According to Carl Jung, there's one insight that separates the 1% from everyone else, the recognition that you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you are not your roles or achievements. You are the consciousness that observes all of these things. Jung discovered that this recognition, this shift in identity from the contents of consciousness to consciousness itself, is what he called the birth of the true self. It's a psychological event so profound that it literally creates a new type of human being. Carl Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." The question is, are you ready to awaken? The path Jung discovered isn't easy. It requires confronting everything you've been taught to avoid, integrating everything you've been conditioned to reject, and becoming everything you never imagined you could be. But here's what Jung knew that 99% of people never discover. You already contain everything you need for this transformation. The archetypes, the wisdom, the power, it's all already within you, waiting to be discovered. Jung said, "What you resist persists, but what you embrace transforms." The 1% have learned to embrace the totality of their being, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, rational and irrational, conscious and unconscious. They've learned to dance with paradox instead of being paralyzed by it. They've learned to find meaning in meaninglessness, to discover order in chaos, to create something from nothing. The question isn't whether you have the capacity to join the 1%. Carl Jung proved that this capacity exists in every human being. The question is whether you have the courage to undertake the journey of becoming who you truly are. As Jung said in his final words, the privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. But remember, this isn't about becoming someone new. It's about discovering who you've always been beneath all the layers of conditioning, beneath all the masks, beneath all the projections. The 1% mindset isn't something you achieve, it's something you remember. And according to Carl Jung, that memory is waiting for you right now, in the depths of your own unconscious mind. The only question remaining is, are you ready to remember who you really are? Carl Jung spent his entire life mapping the territory of human consciousness, leaving us a roadmap to psychological wholeness that 99% of people never discover. But now you know the secret. Now you have the map. The journey to the 1% mindset begins with a single step, the decision to know yourself completely, to embrace your shadows as well as your light, and to become the fullest expression of who you were born to be. As Jung would say, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But now you know the deeper truth. Everything that fascinates us about the extraordinary 1% already exists within us, waiting to be awakened. The question is no longer whether you can develop this mindset. The question is, when will you begin? Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it. And if you'd like to go a step further in supporting this work, you can now leave a super thanks below. It's a small way to say thank you, and it truly helps keep this channel going.